And welcome back to Bayou Time. I'm Martin False. We have the first lieutenant for the Terrebonne Parish Sheriff's Office, Blake Tabor, with us. He's also the public information officer. Blake, good to see you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Good. We see a lot of different things, but let's start off, I think, with the narcotics arrest, because that was a pretty big arrest y'all made.
It was very, very large. We're very proud of this one. So this one in the latter months of this year ultimately resulted in a pretty in-depth narcotics investigation. In addition to our agency, it was also Louisiana State Police CID Region 2, Homeland Security Investigations. The Houma Police Department was a part of that as well. So ultimately, our agents began to receive some information in reference to some drug activity on the part of a K1 Howard. Again, like they do in most cases, this progressed into, you see him pictured here, this progressed into a pretty extensive investigation, which ultimately culminated in a search warrant being served on his residence in the 500 block of Jefferson Davis Street on November 29th. So ultimately, our agents arrived at the location. They were able to take K1 into custody as he was attempting to leave the home. They ultimately completed the search warrant there and recovered an extremely large amount of illegal narcotics to the tune of 1,400 grams of heroin, an additional 100 grams of a powdery white substance that was believed to be fentanyl, in addition to a multitude, you see the photographed here, a multitude of drug paraphernalia type items, in addition to close to $17,000 in cash. Through that investigation, we learned that he did not live at that residence alone. He was there with a girlfriend by the name of Kayla Thomas. You see her pictured here, along with two small children. At the time, the children and Ms. Thomas were not at the residence at the time of the initial search warrant. She ultimately turned herself into authorities at a later time, but he was arrested for a large amount of charges: possession with intent to distribute heroin, distribution of a CDS 2 counts, illegal use of a CDS in the presence of persons under 17, possession of drug paraphernalia, transactions involving proceeds from drug offenses 3 counts, and also taking contraband into a penal institution. Ultimately, he was found with some additional heroin on his person at the time of the booking.
And this is exactly the type of people y'all been targeting and trying to get off the streets.
Absolutely. Look, I think it goes without saying that heroin is an extremely dangerous drug, along with fentanyl. We all know the stories and hear the horror stories about fentanyl. So anytime we can get any amounts of those drugs off of our streets, it's a big win for us.
And the sheriff said, "I'm extremely proud of the agents of our narcotics division, along with the outstanding work of our public safety partners. I personally feel like this tremendous group of men and women are some of the best in this country that we have to offer, and we are very lucky to have them protecting our streets day in and day out." Couldn't have said it better.
No, and I want to add a little bit to that. The group of individuals that we have and the continuity between the agencies here is nothing short of tremendous, and I don't know that people on a daily basis really understand what goes into agencies working together like we do, but it's tremendous, and we're very lucky to have that be the case.
Congratulations on that bust. That's encouraging to see that nasty stuff off the street. The other one, a little more of a unique situation. Huh?
It is. So, this one's sort of a hotbed topic when we talk to parents. It kind of becomes an area of discussion, but this one came in on December 1st. Our patrol division received a call from a 13-year-old victim who claimed that a Susanna Sousa, 44-year-old female from Gray, had basically been involved in a disturbance with her, striking her with a belt multiple times, also striking her in the facial area. You see Ms. Sousa pictured here. When deputies arrived, they were able to determine that a phone call had been made to 911 by the juvenile during the early morning hours of that disturbance, but ultimately evidence was located that Ms. Sousa took possession of the phone and provided false information to the call takers in a fashion to not alert authorities. So ultimately, when we were able to investigate that completely, Miss Souza was taken into custody and charged with cruelty to a juvenile with force or violence, and also interfering with an emergency system. And she still remains jailed at our complex on a $30,500 bond.
I know this one's a little more deeper. You know, growing up, belts were pretty common. I'm sure you'll hear that, but there's a line.
Absolutely. There is a very fine line there. So again, the sheriff's office, we are never going to step in the middle of someone disciplining their child, but discipline and abuse is two different things. Again, we could sit here and discuss all day long about the use of a belt. I think that can be used in an appropriate manner, and I think it could also be used in a very inappropriate manner, and that's what we're here to determine, and that's why we have investigations for those kind of things.
And with a belt, the threat of using the belt can be just as,
Absolutely.
I guess, influencing to the child. Nobody.
Absolutely. And look, we've all had it. And we talk about this all the time. You know, I mean, I remember my grandfather used to whip me with a switch, whenever I would get out of line. But these things are something that we've progressed through times, and maybe they're not as acceptable as they once were. But again, it's about abuse level, and it's about damage and injury to the victim as opposed to the threat.
Well, once again, Lieutenant, thank you for joining us. Keep up the great work, and thank you all for the transparency coming on and letting people know what's happening in their own parish.
Absolutely. You're very welcome. Thanks for having us.
All right, Lieutenant Blake Tabor, always good to see him. I started off way back, and he was a young police officer, and he's worked his way through the ranks. He's done a great job. We'll take a break. We'll come back. We have a lot more news right here on Bayou Time, so always remember, check us out on Facebook and YouTube, and you can check it out whenever you want. We'll be right back.